website itself. All the data is being executed on the back-end SQL server, and that's where all the ownage is actually occurring at. So I'm sure a lot of you knew that. Just kind of giving you through it. So when we're doing these attacks, there's a little bit of a twist. A lot of the tools out there, when you're performing any of these types of attacks, what it does is it drops your stager on there, whether it be a netcat or something like that. And really what it tries to do is start downloading a whole bunch of information, uploading a bunch of information back and forth, trying to get your payload on that server. Now, is anybody familiar with the payload delivery method using Windows Debug? Raise your hands. Cool, we got a few people in here, good. So there's a lot of times when you're doing a pen test and you really want to pop the box. A lot of times people do FTP echo files where you just echo a text file in the system and then it pulls FTP and grabs the file up for you. A lot of people use TFTP to get their payload onto the system. Well, with Windows Debug, what you can do is you can actually take a hexadecimal format, pop it into a text file, and then Windows Debug converts it back to an executable for you. So you don't have to worry about any type of egress connections coming out of the network that might trip off an IDS or IPS. Really, all of your stuff's getting executed through that attack. So there's a slight problem with that, though. Does anybody know the size of an interpreter payload or a VNC payload? So well, the interpreter and VNC payloads are above 64K. They're 151K, could be above that. So with Windows Debug, there's a slight problem. Windows Debug has a restriction of 64 kilobytes. So that means our payload has to be underneath that option. What you guys just saw here is I got a full reverse GUI to the system, completely bypassing Windows Debug. What we ended up doing is we take a little payload that ourselves and get it into hexadecimal format, drop it onto the underlying operating system using Windows Debug, which the payload ends up being about 5K. And really all it is Windows Debug without the restrictions of 64K on it. So we completely bypass the limitation of 64K debug. Now we have an avenue that we can drop any size payload that we want to on the system and completely compromise it however we want to. Good stuff, and it's all automated for you. So it's pretty cool to do because you're not actually initiating any type of egress connections whatsoever until you actually execute that payload, and that payload shoots out and then connects to the reverse attacker or a bind or whatever it ends up being. So it's pretty neat. All right, so here's our next scenario. You're a penetration tester for company X, internal pen test. Most organizations use MS SQL. Sometimes there's Oracle, MySQL, whatever. Specifically in this instance, we're using MS SQL. What do you do?
Use FastTrack.
I like his answer. Use FastTrack. Or quit. Either way. Not a good idea in this economy. All right, let's pop a box. What are you guys scheming on now? So we see here that it compromised 10.2 and 155.5 with the username S8 and password to password. Now, this is not a new attack in any facet. I mean, it's been out there forever, but a lot of times we do break in through development type sites or various areas, and it's definitely prevalent in most organizations. I would say 80% of the pen tests we go onto, we find this, some sort of weak SA password on there. Now, most people would say, okay, I got an SA, so I'm going to spawn a command shell. Well, why spawn a command shell when you get a GUI again? And as it's doing this, it's actually using Meterpreter's payload generator on the fly, converts it to hexadecimal. We drop our first stager payload on there, which bypasses the Windows 64K debug, shoot over the rest of the hex of the Meterpreter payload or Metasploit payload, and actually execute on the system. Looks pretty cool, huh? All right, we just popped another box. So what this really does is it goes through, looks for SQL servers. It can scan its mmap syntax, so B's, C's, certain specific IP addresses, whatever you want to do. And so it goes through and looks for SQL servers. Once it identifies SQL servers, it tries brute forcing the user account on it. If it's successful, it automatically tries to elevate your privileges to the SA and add you to the SA administrator role. If not, rebuilds XP command shell if it's been disabled or deleted, and really tries to get you access to that underlying operating system. Once it gets there, you got full access to that machine at that point. You can do a standard command prompt. You can do a reverse interpreter. You can do a reverse VNC. We also wrote a custom packed reverse shell that completely gets past all antivirus. Yeah, that's hard. But basically, that's what we're able to do. So from here, we have full access. So scenario 3, you're a pen tester for company X. You scan subnet. One server responds on port 80. You manually investigate and identify a query string parameter susceptible to SQL injection. The backend database is identified as MS SQL. Well, let's take a quick peek real quick. All right, so we got this top secret login.
How many top secret login web pages have you seen on internal company sites that use HTTP basic or digest authentication? Just about every SharePoint exists.
Yeah, pretty much.
SharePoint using basic or digest, they all use NTLM and authentication.
No, they don't.
No, they don't all use NTLM.
He's talking about that guy over there, not me this time, okay? So we got a simple SQL injection technique to find it, right? We got an error message, okay, unclose quotation marks. So now that we know it's susceptible to SQL injection, good to go, right? Well, you do some OR 1 equals 1, stuff you learned in middle school. And it successfully logged us in, and the secret to the safe is 3314147. So we know this is susceptible to SQL injection, and if you look at the source, which we're not going to do, but it's actually passing the parameters. You can also pass the parameters on top. So let me show you that. So we know that the login field is susceptible to SQL injection, and the way FastTrack can interpret that specific parameter is susceptible is by putting a single quote and saying inject here. So that tells FastTrack, listen, dude, this is vulnerable. You need to give me a reverse shell. So we're going to go ahead and hang on. Let's pop a box. After the 10th or 11th time, you guys can get so bored of me and just throw some shmoo balls at me. That's fine. One second. So the last one, it automatically pillages the site automatically for you. So it starts going through and crawls the site, tries to inject it in every single point. This is a very focused attack using the query string parameters. So, I mean, if you're not worried about, posting the living daylights out of forms on a website, this is more the route you want to take. More isolated, more strategic in what you're doing, for sure. So I typed in the exact same thing that we typed in before. They saw the default, .aspx question mark, login equals whatever. We just put the inject there. And there's a technique that I use within FastTrack called chunking. And the problem is when you do a GET request, a lot of times the GET requests have specific file, restrictions that you can use in the actual request itself, whereas POST doesn't. So we actually chunk the actual payload up, convert it using Windows Debug, and then attack the system. So when you see the different types of attacks, it's going through that and trying to chunk it up. This can take up to 1 or 2 minutes, but look what we got there. Good shell. Little lights here. See that? So we also got post request, which is pretty easy. You just go to post. You type in the URL that you want to go after. So HTTP 10.211.55.5, and then we'll go after default.aspx. It's going to automatically grab all the post parameters in there, inject into them, and hopefully you get some good stuff.